Alright, so what we have in front of me is my castings tub. This tub has had some finished castings in it for a number of weeks, and after the first 5 days of it just sitting here resting and pretty much being left out to dry a little bit and evaporate, after about 5 days I decided I was going to try baiting the straggler worms out of the material. And I also recognized the fact that it was probably chock full of worm cocoons that were soon to hatch, and that I'd soon have a bunch of little baby worms crawling around within the material. So I wanted to give all of those little critters an opportunity to make their way out of the compost before the compost gets used in the garden or outside or whatever for planting purposes. So I've already gone through a number of cycles of baiting worms out of this material. And once we unload the bait device, we're going to take those worms and we're going to drop them into my newest bin, and then we're going to reload the baiting device if it seems like the material still has worms hanging out in it. And I think even if we don't see any worms, I'm going to do it anyway because, like I mentioned earlier, there's a chance that there's still unhatched cocoons because it's been 3, 6, 18 plus. It's been almost exactly the amount of time it would require for worm eggs to hatch. So, if they're still cruising around within this material, I want to make sure that those little baby worms have a chance to make their way into the baiting device to get to the bait. So, the bait we have today is cucumber peelings and some cantaloupe melon bits, and since I'm anticipating baby worms, I've got grit since they're going to need it. So let's open up this castings tub. And let's extract the bait box. So if you've watched a few of these previously, I've been doing this at 6-day intervals, and it's once again 6 days since I last reloaded this. So underneath this coffee filter, we're going to see some watermelon. Watermelon was the food that I had used previously to try baiting worms. So what we're going to do is we're going to dump out the contents of this bait box to see how we did in terms of rounding up worms from the compost. And then maybe we'll take a quick peek through the compost to see how it looks. And then we'll just reload and replace the bait box. So let's get this thing out of here first. And I usually like to take a peek down in there to see what I can see. And I do believe I see a couple worms hanging around down there, but I'm not going to pay them much mind. I'm just going to leave them be. This piece of paper, this is also a piece of coffee filter, has typically just been on the bottom, resting on the bottom. And the whole idea was that if I did see any worms crawling around on it, then it would be easy enough for me to simply pull it out and retrieve any worms that were on top of it. But that's just not been working, so that's okay. It doesn't matter. Just an idea I had. I may very well put it back down in there, sort of just as a little bit of a platform for the bait box to rest on, rather than having it rest right on the bottom on the castings. So let's dump out the material and see what we ended up with here. Just gonna dump this out and take a peek inside. Can see a couple worms right here. Make sure I get them out, but they're the only ones I saw. So okay, and why don't we spread this around a little bit and try to get a sense of how many worms came to feast on the melon. Stuff is definitely a little bit funky. Here we have another piece of paper that had just been placed in there as sort of the one worm that I was able to round up is trying to get back down into the compost. So down here is those other couple ones that I found on the inner wall of the container. So let's see if we can find any more. It's pretty remarkable. I'm surprised to see only a couple worms in here. I figured watermelon would be the irresistible treat that would have them flocking in droves to this bait box. Just leads me to wonder, is it possible that we might have actually baited all of the adult worms out of this compost? I suppose that's always a possibility. Although I do remember seeing maybe one or two worms kind of on the perimeter of the hole. But I'm going to just kind of try to seal up this little filter here so that none of the worms try to sneak out. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to launch this little, what I've been referring to as a worm burrito. It's more of a watermelon burrito at this point. We'll just go ahead and we're going to launch this into my newest bin that I have on standby right here on the side. But I'm going to set it aside for now and we'll launch that off momentarily. And before we reload this bait container, I'm going to just take a quick probe through this material, see how things are progressing. I'm also interested in seeing how the material is drying out. My main reason for placing the material into this container originally was the fact that I thought it was just too damp. But I like it. I like the way the stuff feels at this point. It's nice and crumbly. Doesn't feel like a big wad of mud. I probe down to the bottom and it feels pretty much just the same. I'm interested in taking some of the material that was on the very top surface and getting it down lower so that some of the more damp material below will have a chance to be out on the top surface. Give some of the stuff that's dried out a chance to rehydrate a little bit by being sent down to the bottom. But my other reason for doing this is also to sort of aerate all of the material throughout, just to give it a good injection of air to make sure it doesn't start to just get all thick and hard and muddy. Okay. And, you know, while I'm doing it naturally, I'm looking around, trying to see if I could spot any baby worms cruising around in the material. And so far, I have not seen any. Here and there, I'm feeling some of the material is still being a little bit damp and not as crumbly as I'd like it to be. But it's definitely an improvement over what it was a few weeks ago when I originally harvested the material and placed it into this container. But I think there's one spot for sure that's worth looking at, which is right down where the bait had been. Even if they didn't make it into the bait box, they might have been, you know, cruising around the perimeter of that hole, trying to get at it eventually, and just maybe might not have actually made it into there. I'm thinking this center section, which is, yep, here we go. There's a couple of worms hanging out. So with these guys, I'm going to try to extract them if I am able. And the container that they're going to go into is my newest bin, which is right on the side here. It's out of view of the camera. All I'm going to do is take these worms that I capture manually and just place them right into that container. That was where I had intended to release the worms that were gathered together in the bait box anyway. So here again, another worm. Just going to start dropping them into that newest of my containers, my newest worm bin over there. But I gotta admit, I'm seeing very, very few worms, much fewer than I had thought. Okay. Not really seeing many other worms hanging out in this material that was close to where the bait was. And this is the material that seems to be the most damp because it was exposed to that melting, decomposing watermelon. Maybe this is where we want to try to drop in some of this drier material from the top surface. I think in general this stuff is all getting mixed together pretty adequately. So whatever makes its way onto the top surface will have a chance to air out a little bit more. And just this movement, you know, this kind of mixing around also gives me a chance to sort of break it up and inject air into the material throughout. So, yeah, I would almost say that if I give this another, you know, few days, and if the baby worms that, you know, emerge from any of the cocoons that might be in this material sense that food supply in the middle of the bin, I'm sure they're going to come running. And I'm sure they'll be glad to find the grit that's in there as well that I'm going to add. And maybe the next time we check in here, we'll be finding ourselves with a slightly better catch in the bait box with a bunch of little baby worms. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for here. So, yeah, I'm not seeing any other worms. It's pretty good. I mean, we had about maybe 4 or 5 in the bait box, and maybe another 4 or 5 that I manually pulled out by hand. But that's not much. That's not much at all. Here I believe we've got a millipede. Millipedes, I believe, are good. They're not harmful. They're just helpers to the composting process. So we'll let that little guy continue roaming through the material. And I guess let's start establishing a new spot for this this bait box. Somewhere down here in the middle. Kind of like so. Oh. There's a worm, and it's a pretty small one. Little baby worm. Might have even been born in this bin, who knows? Gonna throw him into the active composting box over there. Keep him in my colony. But yeah, I think this is really working the way we wanted it to. All right, so really quick, shouldn't take long, just to first of all take the bait box and I think I'm going to alternate a little bit here. I'll drop in a couple cantaloupe chunks, a few peels of cucumber, drop in a little bit of grit, a couple more pieces of cantaloupe, a few more pieces of cucumber peeling, and then what remains. I think that should be adequate. Okay. So now, like I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to go ahead and use this piece of paper again here, this coffee filter, to rest this on top of, like so. And then we'll just gently backfill the material around the baiting box. And I have a feeling that maybe this one last round, I'm not sure if I'll wait 6 days this time or if I'll wait longer, but I think this might be the last go around of trying to give the last few worms that either made their way over into here as part of the harvesting of the material, or any baby worms that might have been actually born in here, give them a chance to, you know, be evacuated from the material and keep them as part of my worm farm. Okay, so I have here a fresh coffee filter that I'm just going to cover up with here. And we'll just restore everything the way it was. And let this continue on as is. So now the last thing to be done is to bring over the newest of my bins. And here, this bin was just fed a few hours ago. And I'm not going to make a big deal out of this. I'm just going to take that little bait burrito or melon burrito with the worms in it, and I'm just going to plant it somewhere down in here in the material. In the past, what we've done was we've actually, you know, observed the worms kind of squirming out of there and releasing them and playing around a little bit, but we've already pretty much had a hands-on view of all the worms that made their way into here. One of them is right there, as a matter of fact. And now they can, you know, be free to roam in this larger container with their cousins. And then this watermelon that came over with them can be consumed with, you know, consumed as part of the food that was given to this bin a short while ago when I fed it. And I guess we'll see what we get next time. Not sure if I'll do it in 6 days again like I've been doing lately, but I guess we'll have to see. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, as always, please remember to give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate that. And consider becoming a subscriber. That's always really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Bye-bye.